All right, good morning, everybody. This is the men's Sunday school class at Mercy Baptist Church. And we're going to be in Genesis chapter 37. We're going to be we'll be starting today and I guess going throughout the rest of the quarter, I guess the end of February, studying the life of Joseph. And the life of Joseph I think is a fascinating and even amazing study because you can see the sovereignty of God all the way through Joseph's life from this chapter on through the end of his life, that God is guiding Joseph's circumstances just every step of the way, because God's got a plan for Joseph. If you're familiar with Joseph's life, any at all, he was sold into slavery. He was become a slave. In Egypt. He was accused of rape. Ended up in prison, and then the next thing you know, God has placed him as the second most powerful man in Egypt, and at that time probably the world. And it's just it's a journey that only God could have brought to pass that way. Now, in our book, we're apparently taking kind of a fast forward way through the life of Joseph, hitting high points. I've got a study that we had here at church a few or maybe even several years ago on the life of Joseph, which is more of a verse by verse study. If you're interested, and you'll find that on the church's website, mercybaptistchurch.org. Actually, it's mercybaptist.org. But even since then, as I was studying at this time, I started seeing even more details where God is, where, a situation could have went one way or the other, and God made sure it went the way that would move Joseph along in his journey to get him closer to being essentially the prime minister of Egypt. All right, before we get started, let's go to the Lord in prayer and ask for his guidance as we study this lesson. So, dear Heavenly Father, I want to thank you again for your love, your mercy, your grace, Lord, for dying on the cross for our sins, Father. And thank you, Lord, for your word, that you have these stories like the story of Joseph, Father, that where you show us, Father, how you move in our lives, Father, that you're able to guide the circumstances in our lives, Lord, to help us to accomplish your will, Father, for our lives. So, you may not want us to be, somebody with great power like Joseph did, but Father, I know you have a role for each one of us, Father, and we just trust you, Lord, that you're in your wisdom and your intelligence, Father, that you know exactly what role each of us need to play, Father, and we just trust you to guide us, our lives along that journey. So, Father, just bless this study and use it for your glory and honor. For it's in Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen. All right, so we're going through Genesis chapter 37. Our book picks up in verse 3. First two verses, if we read those, they give us some important pieces of information. First of all, we're reminded that Jacob is now living in Canaan, where his fathers, Isaac and then Abraham, had lived. We're also told that Joseph is 17 years old, and this gives us a kind of a landmark as we find out later. We can track how long he's been in Egypt because we we're told, I believe he's 30 years old whenever he rises, or when he stands before Pharaoh and Pharaoh promotes him. And so he'll end up being some 13 years in Egypt. And then in these first two verses, we're also told how that Joseph seems to be a bit of a tattletale, that because whenever his brothers are doing something wrong, he's quick to run back to his father and let him know what his brothers are doing. And so, and anybody that has raised more than one child knows that when one child's a tattletale, sows the seeds of anger and hatred and animosity with the other sibling. And so, and this is what happens here. You know, this no doubt starts the seeds of hatred that Joseph's brothers has for him. So we pick up verse 3, and it says, "Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him, and could not speak peaceably unto him." So it says Israel loved Joseph more than all of his children. And why? Because he was the son of his old age. Joseph was the son of Rachel, and Rachel was Jacob's favorite wife. And Joseph was born after many, many years of Rachel not being able to have a child. You know, Jacob may have even given up on Rachel ever bearing him children, or him having a son through Rachel. So when Joseph was born, no doubt he was like, "Aha! Finally, this is the son I've been waiting for so many years." And then it says he made him a coat of many colors. Now, some commentators believe that this coat represented Jacob's intention to make Joseph his heir, which would sort of make sense. I mean, normally that's for your oldest son, which would have been Reuben. But this Joseph being the son of Rachel, the wife that he originally intended to marry instead of Leah, then he may have considered, well, but this is my firstborn son, the son that I should have had. This is the son, of the wife that should have been my wife. And so maybe Jacob felt he was justified, because he may have been following Abraham's example. You remember Abraham, he had Ishmael first, and then later on, Sarah finally, after many, many years, much like Rachel, had her son, Isaac. And God told Abraham, back in Genesis chapter 17 and also Genesis 21, that it was in Isaac that would be the heir, and not Ishmael. And so maybe Jacob thought, hey, well, in his mind, Rachel was his proper wife, and therefore her oldest son should be the heir. And so maybe he felt like he was following the example of his grandfather Abraham. But for whatever reason, if this coat meant that he's showing an honor to Joseph, that he's going to be the heir of the family, and everything I own is going to go to him. Of course, that's going to cause jealousy with his brothers. And it says, when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him. And so it was no secret that Rachel was Jacob's favorite wife, and so he continues that same pattern, and he's not hiding the fact that Joseph is his favorite son. And so when there's always sibling rivalry, and when one child is obviously the favorite, then the other child is going to be jealous of the attention and the favor and everything that the other child is getting. But now you've got, 10 or 11 other brothers who's uh, jealous of Joseph, because he's not only is he a tattletale, but he's also Daddy's favorite. And so it says, and they could not, they hated him, and they could not speak peaceably unto him. That means they couldn't, anytime Joseph come around, they couldn't say, "Hey, how you doing, Joseph? What's up?" Anything like that. They could not say one word to him without their words being laced with some sort of anger or sarcasm or malice. I mean, they was just like, "Oh, it's you, Joseph." They just tension was so thick. Whenever if Joseph walked in, come around, they were instantly just like, "What are you doing here?" And then it gets worse. Verse 5, it says, "And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. And he said unto them, Hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose, and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves stood round about, and made obeisance to my sheaf. And his brethren said unto him, Shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his..." So it says, Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told his brethren. And because he told it to his brethren, they hated him yet the more. And this is just going to add fuel to the fire. I mean, it's they already hate him, and then when he starts having dreams like this, and he decides he has to tell them about it, it just makes this hatred for him even more intense. And then he says, "And he said unto them, Hear, I pray you, this dream that I dreamed." Now the point that the fact that he's making a point to tell them about the dream tells us something about his immaturity. He's 17 years old. He's Daddy's favorite, and so it's quite possible or even probable he's a bit spoiled, and so he's had this dream that, and as we'll see, the obvious point of the dream or meaning of the dream is that he is superior to them, that they will bow down to him and show obeisance, which is what you'd show, the honor and respect and showing, giving yourself in obedience to a king, and that's the obvious meaning of this dream. But he had to be aware that they hated him. He had to be aware that when he told them this dream, it was really going to get their goat, so to speak. It would be rubbing salt in the wound. It would be something that would just annoy them and irritate them and make them hate him worse. So, not all the commentaries I read agreed. Some of them thought maybe, he was a tattletale. He was a bit of a spoilt brat. Others kind of wanted to say, well, no, Joseph was not like that. Try to defend his integrity. I think later as he's sold into slavery, he has to grow up fast, and I think he matures, and God uses his circumstances to give him some maturity and helps him to grow. But here, it seems he is wanting to get a little dig in on his brothers and say, "Hey, listen to this dream that I've dreamed." And of course he describes it. They're all out in the field cutting their sheaves of wheat, and his sheaf stood up, and the rest of them all bowed down to it. And of course, the obvious meaning is Joseph's superiority over his brothers. And of course, his brothers hate that. And so they said, "Oh, really? So shalt thou indeed reign over us, and shalt thou indeed have dominion over us?" Now, this dream, even though they hated it, they didn't like the idea behind it, it's actually a prophetic dream, because this will happen years later. I think some 20 years or so later, they are going to come and they're going to bow down before him and show him honor and respect because they don't realize who he is. And so this dream obviously came from God. And we're seeing here that God is guiding his circuit. Not only is his brothers already hate him, but God gives Joseph this dream that he knows Joseph's not going to be able to keep it to himself. He's got to gloat over it and share it with his brothers, which is going to make his brothers hate it even more. It's because God is guiding the circumstances. God wants Joseph to be in Egypt. And so he's putting the pieces together to make events happen that will bring Joseph to Egypt. And so, Romans 8:28 says, all things work together for good, that for them that love God, for them that are called according to his purposes. God can use even sinful emotions and sinful acts and decisions by people to bring his will to pass. And that's what he's going to do. And it says, and they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. The content of the dream irritated them, made them mad, made them hate him even more. But then it also says, and for his words. And it's not clear if it's, when it says his words, does it mean the fact that he described them, that he had to tell them what his dream was, or is it for his words that maybe he made some smart aleck remarks, or he made some boasting remarks or something like that, after he told them. It's possible even after that, and like the next day, he might have made some sarcastic remark about them bowing before him. Who knows? And if he is doing that, that still shows his immaturity, that he's how much of a daddy's favorite and spoilt person that he is. Then verse 9, it says, and he dreamed yet another dream. And he told his brethren and said, behold, I have dreamed a dream more. And behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren, and his father rebuked him and said unto him, what is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee, to the earth? So Joseph has a second dream, and it's pretty much the same meaning as the first one, except now it's including the sun and the moon, and obviously the sun and the moon refers to his father and his mother. And Jacob picks up on that fact. Now he may have been amused by the first one and thought, well, that's just Joseph being being a kid or whatever, or the sibling rivalry. But now when Joseph tells you this one, it seems Jacob is not as amused. He's thinking, oh, well, you're thinking, me and your mother's going to have to bow down before you? And in this culture, they believed in having the utmost respect for your parents and for your elders. And so the idea of, his parents bowing down to, or the parents bowing down to the children, was unheard of. It was, that just didn't happen. And so Jacob, he says, really? This is really Joseph? He says, you think me and your mother's going to be bowing down to you? And I think actually this does happen. I think Rachel's dead, but Jacob does eventually show respect to Joseph and bows before him, I believe. Don't hold me to it. I'm not 100% sure. It's been a while since I've read that in Jacob's last days. But anyway, our lesson now picks up in verse 23. In verses 11 through 22, the brothers have gone to feed the flock of their father in Shechem, and Shechem's some 50 miles away. And so Jacob sends Joseph to go check on the welfare of the brothers and of the flocks. So Jacob goes, and then he finds out, they're not at Shechem, and he discovers that they've moved on to Dothan. And interestingly enough, Dothan is on a caravan route between Damascus and Egypt. And so we see God's hand here that he has caused the brothers. If they were at Shechem, Joseph wouldn't have ended up in Egypt, but because they moved on to Dothan, that gives the Ishmaelite traders, the opportunity to be coming by, and then the brothers are going to sell Joseph. So God's hand is working. All these little fine details, it's like, well, this could have happened or that could have happened, but God made it happen in such a way to cause his will to come to pass. All right, so Joseph goes on to Dothan, and then the brothers see and they recognize Joseph coming a long ways before he arrives. So apparently they're on a flat area, and they see him, this guy wearing a multicolored coat, coming this way. So they see him coming a long ways before he actually gets there. And so they have time to conceive of a plan to kill him. But Reuben, the oldest son, he convinces the other brothers not to kill him, but to throw him in a pit. And this is because he secretly plans to come back later and rescue Joseph out of the pit and send him home to his father. And so we see God is controlling this situation. Verse 23, and it says, "And it came to pass when Joseph was coming to his brethren, that they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that was on him, and they took him, and they cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, there was no water in it." So when they see Joseph coming a long ways, and when he finally gets there, they grab him, they pull this coat off of him that they hate because of what it represents. Because no doubt Joseph, seems like everywhere Joseph went, he was wearing this coat. He's there, yeah, I'm Daddy's favorite. And if it means he's the heir, he's parading that around. And so they hate that coat, and so they strip it off of him, and then they throw him in this nearby pit where that he couldn't climb out of. And the pit was likely a cistern or similar hole like that was dug to catch rainwater. But God intervened, and he made sure that particular pit did not have any water in it, so Joseph wouldn't drown. So God is taking care of Joseph. He's watching over him because he wants Joseph to go to Egypt, and so he's making sure that Joseph doesn't die before he gets there. Then it skips to verse 28, verses 25 through 27. The brothers display the hardness of their hearts because they sit down to eat a meal after casting their brother into a pit. Then they see while they're eating, they're seeing these Ishmaelite traders passing by, and they're on their way to Egypt. And then Judah, one of the brothers, gets an idea. And, this idea very well may have probably came from God. God gave him this idea because this idea is what is the next step in getting Joseph into Egypt. He proposes that, hey, instead of killing Joseph, why don't we just make a little bit of money, and because we could sell him as a slave, and we'll have, if we just kill him, it ain't going to benefit us. He said, but if we sell him as a slave, hey, we'll have some change to put in our pocket. So the brothers agree to this. So So verse 28 says, Then there passed by Midianite merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph into Egypt. So Now, it seems funny because at one time it says Ishmaelites, now it says Midianites. Uh, but in that day, traveling in large groups helped them guard against robbers. You know, robbers ain't going to attack, uh, a large group of men, or they're going to be less likely to attack large groups of people instead of a small group of people. So they would do that. So it may have been the Midianites were traveling with the Ishmaelites for that reason. Also, the Midianites were closely related to the Ishmaelites because they were both descended from sons of Abraham. So there may have been a little affinity for one another. But as they see them go by, the brothers see their opportunity to sell Joseph. And so it says they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit and sold to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. Now, 20 pieces of silver was the average price for a slave under the age of 20. And we don't find out about this until later, later on in Genesis 42, verses 21 and 22. But apparently Joseph made these heart-wrenching pleas. Brothers, don't do this to me. And, I'm your brother. You can't do this. But they hardened their hearts against him. Because in Genesis 42, I think it was Reuben, not Reuben. One of them was saying, remember, did I not tell you, don't harm the kid, because we heard his cries. So Joseph was apparently begging them, but they hardened their hearts because of their hatred. And so they sold him to the Ishmaelites, and they brought Joseph into Egypt, which is where God wanted Joseph to be. God sovereignly guided all these circumstances to get Joseph transported to Egypt. So now we come to verse 29, and it says Reuben returned to the pit. Apparently he was not with the brothers whenever they decided to sell Joseph. We don't know why he was away, but apparently he comes back and he's figuring, I'm going to make my move now. I'm going to get Joseph out of the pit. I'm going to send him home. But he says, and Joseph returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit. And he rent his clothes, and he returned unto his brethren and said, the child is not, and I, whither shall I go? So when he goes and he thinks he's going to rescue Joseph, and Joseph's not there. So he expresses his grief by tearing his clothes. And then he says to his brothers, the child is gone, or the child is not. In other words, he's not here. I've lost my opportunity. And he says, and whither shall I go? What am I going to? He's basically saying, what am I going to do now? Because Reuben's the oldest brother. His father is probably going to hold him responsible for all this that's happened. And so he's just like, well, where am I going to go? What am I going to do now? Father's going to hold me responsible. And he really didn't want anything to do with harming Joseph, it seems. But now he feels like he has no choice but to go along with this cover-up and covering up what the brothers have done. Now he's going into, survival mode or self-protection mode. He's covering his own self. Verse 31, it says, and they took Joseph's coat and killed a kid of the goats and dipped the coat in the blood. And they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it unto their father and said, this have we found. Know now whether it be thy son's coat or no. So now the brothers, this story, Joseph's life, it can make a great movie, great TV series or miniseries, because this is now they're covering up their crime. It's like, you watch a movie or something other and somebody's they're trying to hide the body or trying to cover up the evidence or whatever. This is what the brothers are doing. They take Joseph's coat, they put goat's blood on it, because modern forensics, they'd be able to say, hey, this is not human blood. It doesn't match Joseph's DNA. It's this is not Joseph's blood. But back then, there's no way that Jacob could tell the difference between animal blood and human blood. And so they put the blood on Joseph's coat to make it look like something horrible has happened to Joseph. He got killed right there while he was wearing his coat. And something that I didn't notice, I guess till this morning, I was going back over this and reading it, and it says, and they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it into their father. I always had assumed when they returned to their father, they took the coat with them and said, hey, whose coat is this, do you think? But it says they sent the coat, so they may have taken a servant and said, here, you take this back to our father with this message, and the message is, this we have found, know now whether it be thy son's coat or no. So they're saying, look, here's the coat, we found it, and they're acting like, well, we're not sure if this is Joseph's coat, and so they let Jacob draw his own conclusions. They're being pretty crafty about this, and they don't have to. And if they did send this by a servant, they don't have to look their father in the eye and say, oh, and just lie to him through their teeth and say, hey, here's a coat we found, is that you think this is Joseph's? And Jacob apparently doesn't question that. Oh, how could you not recognize Joseph's coat? This is a one of a kind coat. But they're deceiving their father. So verse 33, it says, and he knew it and said, in other words, he recognized the coat. He recognized that this was Joseph's coat. And he says, it is my son's coat. An evil beast hath devoured him. Joseph is without doubt rent in pieces. And Jacob rent his clothes and put sackcloth upon his loins and mourned for his son many days. So he says, he recognizes it. And he immediately jumps to the worst case scenario. He believes the worst, that Joseph's dead. This much blood, some wild beast must have attacked him, and tore him to pieces. So I guess there wasn't a whole lot of detective work. There was no well, where's the body? What happened? Why is there no body parts in the thing? All that gruesome aspects of it. All they've got is a coat with blood on it. But Jacob believes it. He falls for it. He's convinced that Joseph is dead. And so it says Joseph rent his clothes. That's how they mourned back then. He tore his clothes. He put sackcloth on his loins, and he mourned for his son many days. So he is just devastated. In fact, as we read through the life of Joseph, Jacob, he's a very emotional man. He gets when the thought of him losing a son, it just tears him up. And so verse 35 says, and all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, for I will go down to the grave unto my son's mourning. And thus his father wept for him. So, his sons and his daughters, and the daughters, as far as we know, we've only got one daughter named Dinah, but this could also include his daughters-in-law. But they're all trying to comfort him. And he refuses to be comforted. He is just distraught. He's lost his favorite son, and there's nothing that's going to console him. And he says, look, I'm going to go down my grave. In other words, I'm going to grieve for him for the rest of my life. And this is thus his father wept for him. In other words, this is how intense the grieving was at Jacob. Now, can you imagine the brothers as they're watching their father go through this, and they know responsible. They are the ones who that caused this to happen. That's caused, or they're responsible for the events that has caused their father to grieve like this. And so, and then it makes an impression on them. And years later, when they're standing before Joseph and they don't know it's Joseph, all they know is he's threatening to take Benjamin, their other brother, away from them. And they're pleading. Judah. It's Judah. Judah taking the lead. Judah makes an emotional plea for mercy because this is Genesis chapter 44, verses 30 through 34. He makes an emotional plea for mercy because he doesn't want to see his father go through this grief again. He said, if we go home and Benjamin is not with us, he says something along the lines of, gray hairs to the grave or something. Anyway, it's just going to kill him. And Judah does not want to see his father go through this time. I mean, he knows how he grieved for Joseph. So if Benjamin comes home, there's the second son from Rachel that's been taken away. He says it'll just kill our father, and he doesn't want him to have to go through that again. So watching their father here, it had to have tore their heart out, but they still do not confess, though. So then verse 36, it says, and the Midianites sold him into Egypt unto Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's and captain of the guard. So when the Midianites arrive in Egypt, hey, they got this slave for sale. They sell Joseph as a slave, and a man named Potiphar purchases Joseph. Now it says Potiphar, he's an officer of Pharaoh's, and it says he specifically is a captain of the guard. Now some commentators believe that captain of the guard means that Potiphar was over the king's or over Pharaoh's executioners. Others believe that it means just he was captain over the royal bodyguard. But whichever one is true, this connection to Pharaoh shows that God is still working. He's guiding. Not only has he gotten Joseph into Egypt, but God's also making sure he's right there where there's the path from where he is into Pharaoh's palace, which is where he gets when Pharaoh promotes him and makes him the second most powerful man in Egypt. So God he is controlling it every step of the way. He is guiding. Now Joseph, he probably feels like his life is just falling apart. Everything he's known has been taken away from him because he's been taken from his home, sold into Egypt, and he's a slave. He thinks his life's falling apart, but God is guiding these things. And sometimes when we think our life's falling apart, we think, oh, well, here's something negative. This shouldn't have happened. This is a bad thing that happened to me. Well, maybe God is working in your life. Maybe he's using that to move you from where you are to where he wants you to be. Because we don't know the will of God necessarily, on this type of a level. I mean, we know the broad strokes that God wants, all to be saved. He wants people to obey him, to live righteously, those types of things. But when it comes down to our day-to-day lives, we don't necessarily know, does God want me to be a mechanic, or does he want me to be a welder or a plumber, or does he want me to drive this car or that car, or live at this house or that house? We might not necessarily know that, short of his guidance, but God can move us where he wants us to be later in life. He can guide the circumstances to get us from here to over there. And I could tell a short story, but I don't think I have time for that. But we'll pick up chapter 39 next week, and we'll see now that Joseph is a slave under Potiphar. We'll see how God is guiding his life through the circumstances under Potiphar's roof. So until then, hey, read the story of Joseph. It's a fascinating story.